March 20th, 2021 meeting of the Humanist Society of Santa Barbara. I'm Judy Flattery. I'm president of the society. I want to welcome everyone to this meeting and remind you that you can follow us on Facebook, join our Facebook group. You can become a member, supporter, or a patron of HSSB. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and check out our events on the Secular Coalition of Southern California's meetup site. There's a lot of great events that are advertised there. So I wanted to start on a somber note and talk a little bit about the Atlanta massage parlor shootings this week. Much of the narrative this week in the news has focused on misplaced anti-Asian sentiment and the deplorable nature of hate crimes thought to be associated with blaming China for the pandemic. As a secular humanist, I found myself focusing on another aspect of the shooter's motives as described in his own words and those of his roommate that I wanted to share with you here. This is from a New York Times article that's online this week. It says, the suspect, Robert Aaron Long, has been charged with 8 counts of murder, 1 count of aggravated assault. So he said that he had targeted the spas because he wanted to remove temptations. A former roommate at a halfway house said that Mr. Long had tried to stop acting on his sexual desires as recently as 2020, but had continued going to massage parlors for sex. His former roommate said in an interview that he lived with Mr. Long, the shooter, at a house in the Atlanta suburbs for about 5 months, beginning in August 2019. And nearly once a month, Mr. Long, who was 20 at the time, would admit to Mr. Bayless and others in this halfway house that he had again relapsed by visiting a massage parlor to have sex with an employee. This is the part that got me. He said that Mr. Long's admissions were always paired with discussions about his Christian faith and his relationship with God and his parents. It tore him up inside. Once the roommate recalled that Mr. Long, the shooter, had called him into his room and asked him to take a knife from him, saying that he was worried he would hurt himself. I'll never forget him looking at me and saying, "I'm falling out of God's grace," Mr. Bayless, the roommate, said. So, given these events and the connection between maybe the shame that this individual felt, the connection to his motives, his Christian upbringing, his feelings of letting down his parents or letting down his God, I couldn't think of a better, more insightful speaker for us to have today than Dr. Darrel Ray. And I think we're very fortunate to have him back with us. Let me introduce you to him. And then he may have some comments to make about these recent news events. So Dr. Darrel Ray is an organizational psychologist who specializes in the treatment of religion-induced trauma, secular sexuality, and workplace organizational culture. He's an atheist activist, a public speaker, and a podcaster. He's author of the book, The God Virus. He founded the nonprofit organization Recovering from Religion and the Secular Therapy Project. He spoke to us in 2010 to a standing room only crowd. I don't know how many of us are standing right now. It looks like most people are sitting right now. And he spoke to us again last January, 2 months ago, in conjunction with our January 2021 COVID talk about the religious service attendance during a pandemic. Today, he's going to talk about the history of his organization, Recovering from Religion, talk about each of the programs in his organization, how they work to help people. He'll also discuss the psychology behind their approach and why it's so important. And I'll, before turning it over to Dr. Ray, I sometimes like to connect what our speakers are talking about and why we select these speakers with some affirmation of humanism. And I found this one by Paul Kurtz. He said, "We believe in optimism rather than pessimism, hope rather than despair, learning in the place of dogma, truth instead of ignorance, joy rather than sin or guilt, tolerance in the place of fear, love instead of hatred, compassion over selfishness, beauty instead of ugliness, and reason rather than blind faith or irrationality, from Paul Kurtz. So with that, Dr. Darrel, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Judy. Well, good to be back with you guys for the third time, I guess. It seemed like what it is. And I really enjoyed my first talk with you guys. It was a fun talk. I even have direct memories of some of the questions that came out of that. Well, let me say, first of all, just kind of in response to what you started out with, Judy, the words from this person's very mouth clearly focus on the religious component, and yet the racial component is what the media focuses on. And I haven't seen a lot of evidence yet, and I'm not declining, I'm not saying it's not there, I just haven't seen it yet, that the evidence, the motivation was highly racial. I do see the motivation was highly religious, and there's probably a reason why one gets more play than the other. And in my experience, religion gets a pass way too often. And I mean, look at Dylan Roof, when he murdered so many people in the black church. Nobody was talking about his religious beliefs and his white supremacy that was tied to his religion. That seemed to always get a pass. They called it his racism, but racism comes from somewhere. And I think we've got evidence that it comes from the religion. But anyway, that's my 2 cents. I'm actually working on an article. Literally, I wish I had it finished now, but it's probably not going to be finished for a while. On the roots of what we're seeing, and I was working on that article before the current murders happened in Atlanta, and I look back at what I've written in the article and think, dang, I'm not sure I'll change anything because it's just an example of what I'm writing about. But that's not why I'm here today. I'm here today to talk about something that's incredibly near and dear to my heart, and that is, how do we help people in their journey out of religion? Because as we can see just by the current news cycle, ideologies infect people's brains. And if you've read my book, The God Virus, that's really the theme of The God Virus, is how do people get infected with ideological ideas that really pervert their ability to perceive the real world. And when they start having conflicts in their mind between here's what I was taught as a child, here's the way I was indoctrinated, and here's the way the world is responding to me, or here's the way the world seems to act, that conflict causes what we know of as cognitive dissonance. And people feel cognitive dissonance. I'm going to assume that you know basically what cognitive dissonance is, but it's basically holding two contradictory beliefs. That's the simplest description. And if you've got two contradictory beliefs, they're gonna knock heads, and that's gonna cause concern. It's gonna cause discomfort, and in many cases, it causes something that is as powerful as pain. Many people don't realize that the cognitive dissonance that people experience within their religious upbringing and their sexuality, for example, the contrast between my normal behavior, my normal developmental cycle, which means I'm going to act certain ways as a human being as I go through developmental cycles. For example, I'm going to want to masturbate. I'm going to want to have sex. I'm going to, want to eat certain foods. There's lots of things that I'm going to do just because I'm going through developmental cycles. And yet religion comes along and says the opposite. You can't masturbate. You can't have sex before marriage. You can't fantasize. And you can't eat certain foods. There's all these things that religions tend to restrict. And as people come to realize that their upbringing, indoctrination, the cult that they're in is in fact a cult, then they start trying to separate, and that causes incredible pain. And I'm here to talk to you about how we help people deal with that pain. Let me start by giving you an example. Some of us, hopefully not many of us, but some of us have experienced difficult pain, long-lasting pain. Perhaps you had a backache that just wouldn't go away for months on end. or maybe as a result of an accident, you had damage, that nerve damage that just causes pain, pain, pain. And you probably know, if you reflect on it, that you got into a cycle of trying to find a way to alleviate that pain. I mean, some of us learn to live with pain for the rest of our lives. That's true. But a lot of times we go into a cycle of, I got to do something to get rid of this pain. It's just distracting. It's harmful to my health. It distracts me from what I really want to be doing with my life. That is real pain, and people get into a cycle of this pain relief process. Cognitive dissonance does the same thing. It puts people into a cycle of pain relief. They look for, how do I get out of this pain? And when they finally start moving away from it, they don't experience less pain. They experience more pain. And let me explain that. When somebody leaves a religion, they oftentimes are shunned by their family. They lose their children. They lose their spouse. They might lose their job. I mean, there's a lot of things that happen when somebody moves away from their religion in many people's lives and many communities. So they don't experience less pain leaving Jehovah's Witnesses, or less pain leaving Mormonism, or less pain leaving Baptists, or less pain leaving Islam. In fact, some countries and some cultures and some religions, they're going to experience more pain, like getting your head chopped off. That's not very desirable, but that's in fact what happens to some people as they leave religion. So in 2009, I started the organization Recovering from Religion, having no idea what I was doing. I had no idea that I was creating this organization that it turned out to be. But I started it because I saw people in a lot of pain. I saw people coming to me independently, just saying, Darrel, I need help. I don't know how to deal with the fact that my parents have disowned me now. I don't know what to do because my spouse is leaving me because I'm coming out as gay or bisexual or whatever. And there's this incredible disturbance in their life, and they don't know how to deal with it. And they have no resources for dealing with it. So when we started Recovering from Religion, we started it as a local support groups. I will say it's like Alcoholics Anonymous, only we want nothing to do with that, actually. It's just, it's local and it's peer support. We don't keep you around forever, and we don't say you're addicted or any of that kind of bullshit. We're just here to help you while you're in your journey. And from that has come a whole series of programs over the last. We're celebrating our 12th anniversary next month. April of next month, it will be 12 years since we started Recovering from Religion. So I want to share with you how we go about that. I want to begin by sharing with you a little bit about the psychology of what we do and why we do it a specific way. I'm a psychologist by training, originally counseling psychology, went to clinical, and then it ended up in organizational. But we have some other psychologists and social workers helping us, and we've developed training programs and protocols for helping people. And we've experimented a lot with this over the years, and we've come to a really solid place where we can train. For example, one of you might want to volunteer for Recovering from Religion. And if you do, we'll bring you in and we'll train you rather systematically about how you go about helping somebody in their journey. People don't need advice when they come to us. In fact, that's probably the last thing they need. They need emotional support for the journey that they're in. And so we train people to help look for the emotional conflict that every single person comes to us with, and then help them work through that. And once they work through it, then there's some resources we can share with them. We can turn them on to some therapy if they need it. There's other places to get advice. But our main concern is helping you deal with that immediate pain that you're experiencing because, your community has disowned you. You've been shunned. You've been disowned by your grandparents. Your father has beaten you because you told him you don't believe anymore. But there's so much pain that people experience. So when somebody comes to Recover from Religion, they oftentimes come through our chat line. And I'm going to open this up. I hope I don't hit the wrong button here. There we go. I'm going to show you what happens. If you're on a computer, you can follow me on this a little bit. I'm going to, let's see here. Can you see my screen here? I am.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay. Now, Marion or Judy, one of the two of you, if you want to go to recoveringfromreligion.org, and anybody can do this, but I've set Marion and Judy up for being my confederates here.
Oh, yeah, Marion sent one in there already. You see
Oh,
it?
Marion is already ahead
She's
of everybody.
fast.
Okay.
Yep.
So Marion has just chatted in, and I'm going to act as if Marion is a client. Now, anybody that chats with us, we call them clients. That's our terminology internally. Marion had said, Darrel, how can you help a trans woman who doesn't feel welcome in the church she grew up in, but still wants to be in a faith community? There's so much hurt with religious non-acceptance and anything that is non-binary if you use that concept. So I will come back and I will say, welcome. Well, Marion, this is a safe space, etc. I'm not going to sit here and type. You don't need to watch me do that. And I will ask her some preliminary questions. I'll try to understand who she is, what her pain is. And this is not, what Marion has just sent in is not uncommon. This is actually, I'm not going to say it's our average chat, but it's not unusual. We see probably a couple of these kinds of chats a week. And we will see, we generally average probably around 300 chats and probably another 140 or so phone calls each week. And as we receive these, we try to interact with the client. I'm going to go way back here, and I'm going to show you, for example, a chat that just came in today. This was, or yesterday, I'm sorry. Yesterday, we had a chat come in, and this person was dealing with some issues that Jeff, our chat line, as you can see here, is trying to work with him on. Here's another one that wanted to ask some philosophical questions. And we're confidential here. We don't let people see stuff, but I'm just kind of rolling through real quickly so you can see that these chats go on and on and on. We will get dozens of chats a day sometimes. And all of our chat line agents are answering these, and they're answering these through the components of our training that we've given them, helping them identify resources. And once we realized, okay, what is the problem this person is experiencing, then the chat line agent will run in here, and I've just changed screens for you, and they'll look down here and they'll see.
We're still seeing the old screen.
Oh, well then how do I change that? I thank you for telling me. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure how I do.
Yeah, we're still seeing the welcome, Marion. This is a safe space. Send message. Maybe unshare and reshare again.
Does that make a difference, what I just did?
No.
Okay. Yep, I'll have to stop sharing and come back in.
Okay.
I'm not even sure I'll do that. I'll just say that once somebody's chatted with us and we've identified what their main concern is, we go to a library. We have a vast library of resources, online library, that our agents have fingertip access to. And they can hit a button and say, here's a resource that might fit your needs. So in the case of what Marion just sent us, we would have a bunch of resources around families and trans and LGBTQ issues. And we'll ask them if they, if there's any groups that they belong to, and if they need a group, they need community, they need support. And if they say yes, then we have some options to invite them to, say, a local group. We've got a local group in Los Angeles, by the way. We have 55 local groups around the world, and our groups go from London to Sydney, Australia, and mostly in North America, of course, but Mexico City. And we have volunteers that cover 16 time zones right now, which allows us to talk to people in almost any time zone. Our Australian volunteers actually take a large number of American chats after midnight because we're asleep here, but they're wide awake. It's quite an international effort that we have here, and we've got well over 275 volunteers, most of whom are engaging in some kind of support for clients, at least on a weekly basis, if not a daily basis. It takes a lot of people to run this organization, and everyone except our executive director, everyone is a volunteer. Well, Gail's a volunteer. Gail Jordan, you may have heard or met her actually, but she's the only person we actually pay. We don't pay her much, I'll tell you that, but it's a labor of love, to say the least. But these 275 plus volunteers are so damn dedicated. Most of them are giving 10, 20 hours a week sometimes. I'm shocked at how much time they give to engaging in chats and answering phone calls. Last year we added 4 more phone lines. We always had one for the United States, but we've added Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, and South Africa as direct phone lines. So you can call us from any of those countries. And you'll get a volunteer on the other end that listens to you and responds to you as a human being, will not give you advice. And we are absolutely not into converting or deconverting anybody. And so the psychology of it that I mentioned earlier, we've found that if you just stay neutral, if you just ask good questions, and we train our people in street epistemology, if you're familiar with that. And what we found is if you just ask good questions, people will find their own way. 9 out of 10 people, and I'm just pulling that out of my head, 9 out of 10 people that come here move farther away from religion after talking to us. There are some that come and they may move from one religion to another. They may leave being a Baptist and become a Unitarian. You know, we really don't care. We've even had people say, I'm an ex-Muslim, but I'm going to become a Buddhist now. Okay, we'll give you resources for that too. If you don't try to preach or push a line on somebody, they oftentimes find their own way, and it's more often than not closer to being a humanist, much closer to being a humanist. And it's an elegant way to help people. In fact, one of the toughest things that people have to deal with as a volunteer here is recognizing that advice giving is actually damaging. It generally turns people off. It also oftentimes betrays a lack of understanding on your part. When you start giving advice to somebody, you're generally basing that advice on your own life without understanding their life. And it's actually quite a sophisticated skill to understand what other people are going through. And once I think you truly understand what somebody else is going through, you'll realize the futility of giving advice. But what you can do is you can give resources. And that's what we train our therapists to do. So let me move on and show you something else that we have. If somebody chats with us, and I'm going to try to do this again here, I'll get on the spot I want this time. If somebody chats in with us and says, I really need community, I need to talk to somebody who's gone through the same thing that I have, then we will invite them to an internal, there we go, an internal support group that we run online. And you can see here that this channel, we call them channels on the left, you'll see we've got addictions, Australia, Baptist, Black non-believers, Catholic, Christian, clergy plus. We actually have clergy come to us.
Wow, clergy come to you.
Oh yeah, and clergy plus involves not just clergy, but the wives of clergy, the children of clergy, people who are impacted by clergy. And that's quite an interesting discussion. But if you come to us and you chat and you say, you know, I'm divorced now, but I was married to a Baptist minister for 20 years. We're going to say, you might want to join our Clergy Plus channel. And they'll get in there and get stories from other former ministers' wives. Or they'll get in there and have discussions with other former ministers, you know, who are trying to deal with divorce, or, you know, the fact that the minister left the ministry, but their wife stayed, that sort of stuff. We
So
also have,
would you actually have active clergymen or clergy people in there who are struggling with a loss of belief, but it's their job that they run this church kind of a thing?
yeah, we've got two in there right now. We have
Wow.
two people that preach every Sunday right now.
Wow.
But we are not in competition with another organization. I want to be clear. The clergy, there's another organization called the Clergy Project that we cooperate with. And those people can actually be active clergy as well. They have over 1,000 clergy in the Clergy Project. And some of those people come to us because we have the ability to give more active support in some areas. For example, you cannot become a part of the Clergy Project if you're a spouse of a clergy or a former spouse of a clergy or a child of a clergy. So we offer a little wider services than they do, but we are very much in support of them. I'll tell you some other things we've done for them in the past. But as you can see, we've got all these ex-communities like ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, ex-Jewish. We've got ex-Mormons. And we also have a rather vibrant LGBTQ plus group because and we've got a sexuality on down here. You'll see sexuality. There's so much, people come to us with so many problems with sexuality, which is part of the reason I wrote my book, Sex and God, because religion really screws up your sex life. And we get so many chatters, hundreds of chatters a month, that I will just say probably 80% of our chatters come in with some kind of sex related problem. And it could be everything from, I feel guilty because I had a fantasy last night and my religion told me that's wrong. Well, most normal people on the planet have fantasies. So it sounds innocuous to us humanists, but it's not to somebody who's just leaving religion. It's a part of that pain that I talked about earlier. How do we deal with the pain? And that's where we're at. So you can see all these channels. I think we've got 24 channels right now of different flavors, if you will. And they can join any of these or all of these if they want to. We don't care. We'll let you into anything. And this is another way that we continue to provide support. When they get inside of these channels, they can talk to each other about that channel's issues. If it's ex-Catholic, they'll all be Catholics. They're in there. They'll all be talking to each other. And we do have some monitors, volunteer monitors that are in there to make sure that people behave properly. And we almost never have any problem because it's not a Facebook, it's not a Twitter, it's inside of us, and we vetted the people. If we think somebody could be a problem, we just don't let them in the first place. But that's pretty rare. So you can see this is another component of the support that we offer at Recovery from Religion. Part of my excitement in talking to the group here today is because most of you won't need these services, but you probably know somebody that does. Or if you don't now, you probably will. You'll come across somebody who is leaving their Mormon faith and they're in pain. You can't help them. You don't have the training. You don't have the time. You don't have the energy, or it's too close a relationship. You don't want to be involved at that level. For whatever reason, you can say, go to Recovery from Religion. Just talk to them. They can probably help you. And then from that, we will be able to invite them into a community. We'll be able to give them some resources. Be able to be just a listening ear to give them some sympathy, help them understand that they are not alone. I will say this, probably, Judy, the most common phrase that we find ourselves saying on the chat line is, you are not alone. Mm. So many people come to us and they say, I'm the only atheist in Montana. Or even worse yet, I'm an atheist and I'm in Bangladesh. We get chats from Pakistan. We get chats from Saudi Arabia. Now we have protocols that we require them to go through to protect their privacy, of course, because some of those governments will chop your head off for talking to us. So we're pretty careful about that. I mean, there's no guarantee, but we're pretty good about making people use VPNs and private messaging systems. But
Darrel, a question for you.
Sure.
Didn't you grow up religious, and then as you left, did you experience this kind of pain?
I was one of the lucky. I think that's a good question, Judy. I would just say from the age of 12, I didn't really buy all this stuff. However, I bought the religious line, and I went to college. I got an anthropology and sociology degree, which aren't real religious friendly, as you might imagine. But I went to a Quaker school at Friends University. So I was getting the religion. There was religion requirements. And my parents were very religious, and they became missionaries when they retired, actually. My grandfather was a country church preacher. My other grandfather was an elder in the church for his whole life. So yeah, I grew up in a very religious environment, and I didn't know how to get out of that. And I bought into much of it. In fact, so much of it that I went to Scarrett College for Christian Workers and got my master's degree. I thought I'd be a minister, a liberal minister, if you will. I was pretty liberal. I mean, 12 years old, I brought some fossil shark's teeth in from a hike I'd done and showed them to my aunt and my mom and said, "Wow, Mom and Aunt Margie, how'd those sharks get clear up? How'd they get clear up in the top of that mountain that I hiked on?" And my aunt said, "Well, God put them there in the flood." And at that point, I just thought that I didn't say it out loud, but I thought to myself, you have no clue what you're talking about. I believed in evolution since I learned about it. It was just that simple. So I never bought any of the fundamentalist stuff. And I didn't argue with my grandfather when he said there's no such thing as evolution. I just went on my way. Excuse me. So the answer to that question, yeah, I was raised in a pretty religious, even fundamentalist environment. It just never took. However, what did take was the liberal religion, and I was that by the time I finished with a master's degree in religion, I pretty much realized it was all bullshit, and I was on my way out. The trouble is I was married. I had 2 kids, or one kid and one on the way. And my wife wanted to stay going to church. So we were able to come to a compromise and go to the most liberal church we could find in whatever town we were living in. And that lasted until we got divorced in 1988. And at that point in time, I declared my freedom from religion and never looked back. It's tough when you're in a family. So I guess part of I did experience a little bit of that pain, Judy, in that when I did finally leave, there was some concern in my parents when I finally came out. I'll tell you a funny story. I was recently divorced, 2 years after I'd gotten divorced, and I was starting to date again. And I started dating this nice woman, and I told my mom, I'm 40 and I'm 41 years old at the time, so it's not like I'm a kid. I told my mom I'm dating somebody. She says, "Well, I hope she's a nice Christian woman." And I said, "Mom, if she's a nice Christian woman, I'm running as fast as I can." And that's when I came out to my mother that I was an atheist. So, but I was the oldest child. And me and my second brother were the only ones going to take care of my parents. And they loved me. I loved them. And religion never got in the way of our relationship.
Great.
So to their dying day, I had a close relationship with my mother and father, and religion just wasn't a factor. They knew I was an atheist. We didn't make a big deal out of it. They went to their mission stuff, and that was the way they wanted to spend their lives. So yeah. All right. Did I answer your question a little bit?
Yes,
there?
thank you.
All right. I can talk all day about that, but we didn't come to talk about me. So if somebody, what I've told you is that you can chat with us, you can call in, we can give you resources, we can invite you into a group online, and we can also invite you to our Monday night sessions that are kind of like this. It would be a special guest speaker giving a talk on something of their expertise. Every Monday night, we will have 100 to 150 people showing up on Zoom, listening to a talk by somebody like Jack Wathy, who's with us today, by the way. Jack has been involved in some of the stuff we've done. And so another thing we can invite you to is a local group. So we have local groups, like I said earlier, all over the world, and they're led by trained volunteers. They may meet in the back room of a coffee shop, or they might meet in a library conference room. It's not happening right now because of COVID. So we've moved those to Zoom, to online. And our attendance at those has skyrocketed. And the interesting thing was, for example, we had a meeting last week, our Sydney, Australia meeting, met online, and they had people from New Hampshire to Japan attend that meeting. And they weren't expecting that. I mean, that wasn't a planned thing. I think they had 26 people show up from something like 5 different countries. And it was, I mean, it was an excellent meeting, but quite international, if you will. And think about this. Of those 26 people, you have Jehovah's Witnesses, you have Mormons, you have Catholics, you have ex-Buddhists, you have ex-Muslims, and I'm probably not even hitting all of them by a long shot. And think about what happens when you get 10, 20 people in the room with that variety of religions, and they start comparing notes. And this is what happened to me 12 years ago when I had the first Recovering from Religion meeting in the back of an IHOP, and I don't mean International House of Prayer, I mean International House of Pancakes. In the back of an IHOP, I had 11 people show up to the first meeting, and I only knew one of those people. And all I did was say, how did religion hurt you? And how have you benefited from leaving? And 3 hours later, the restaurant manager is kicking us out because of they're closing the room. And the restaurant, maybe, I don't remember. At that moment, I knew I had a tiger by the tail. These people were crying. They were expressing their anxiety, their pain. But most importantly, light bulbs went on when an ex-Scientologist and an ex-Baptist looked at each other and said, you're a totally different religion, and yet you experienced the same thing I did. They used the same brainwashing techniques on you as they did on me, and they're totally different religions. So these light bulbs start coming on when people start sharing their experiences from vastly different religions. I mean, think Mormon and Catholic and Baptist all in the same room, or Muslim. Add Muslim in there, and it really gets interesting sometimes. So those are the main programs that we have. And then if somebody needs professional help, we go one step further. In 2012, I started another component of a program of Recovering from Religion. It's called the Secular Therapy Project. And some of you know Richard Wade. And Richard was a founding member of the Secular Therapy Project. He's still a member, but he was a founding member of the vetting team, the team that helped decide whether a therapist was being admitted to our database or not. So I'm going to stop sharing and show you one other screen here. And that is our Secular Therapy page.
Richard Wade is in our leadership team for the Southern California Secular Coalition, and he's in the Los Angeles area.
Yes, and Richard really was a big help to us in getting this started. What Richard did is, you'll see here, Secular Therapy Project. If you go to the website, if you're on a computer, you want to look at this, you just go to seculartherapy.org, all one word, and you'll see this screen or something like it. You won't, I've got the administrator screen, so you might not see everything. But you can see right here, as I pass over this, can you see that?
Yes,
Okay, I don't know, can you see that if I pass over New York? It says
24.
All right, great. So as you pass over every one of those states, you'll see that those are the number of therapists that we have registered in that state. So we've got 44 in Texas. We have none in South Dakota or North Dakota. There's 6 states we don't have any in. We wish we did. And there's 7 countries. You'll notice we have therapists in Argentina, one in South Africa, one in the Netherlands. We've got 5 in the United Kingdom. We got 17 in Canada and so forth. And we're expanding internationally. Excuse me. So what we discovered, or what I discovered in 2011, 2012 was, it is hard to find a therapist that doesn't believe in Jesus. It is hard to find a therapist that doesn't believe in New Age woo-woo bullshit. There are scientifically validated approaches to mental illness. And I found you can't find people easily that that toe the line on those, what we call evidence-based methods for psychotherapy and mental health. So I created the Psychotherapy Project, and we created a vetting system to question people, and we require them to fill out a fairly extensive application, tell us what their training is, tell us what their philosophy of therapy is, what their main focus is. It's fairly extensive, and we admit about 70% of the people who apply to us, we will let them in. About 30% we reject. Oftentimes we reject them because they're still religious. We frankly don't want any religious therapists in our database. There's plenty of places you can go find a religious therapist. You can go find a Christian counselor, you know, that kind of stuff. We don't, nothing to do with that. If you're not evidence-based and well-trained and secular, you don't get in our database. So I can pretty much guarantee that if you go to somebody in the 23 people in Florida that are registered with us, they will be well-trained. They'll use evidence-based methods, and they're probably atheist at best and agnostic at worst, or whatever.
So Darrel,
you know.
I got a question for you.
Yep.
So say if I'm experiencing some issue in life and I want to talk to a therapist, and maybe it has nothing to do with me leaving my religion or my atheism or anything, it's some other issue. Is this a resource I can use to find a therapist that's a secular?
Absolutely. I mean, these people are not there just for religious issues. What we're doing is we're saying that no matter what problem you go to, they're not going to send you back to Jesus. Here's the deal. You could go in Oklahoma City, you could look up, you know, online, any random therapist in Oklahoma City, go visit them, and you'll probably see a Bible on their shelf, or you'll probably see a crucifix, or you'll probably see on their webpage a description that says they're a Christian counselor. There's so many damn counselors that have got a religious focus. And even if they don't overtly have a religious focus, they may have a New Age kind of religion, which is a religious focus as well, just a different kind. And all we're saying is that you're not going to get a therapist that says, well, part of your depression may be because you don't go to church often enough, or you may be depressed because you're an atheist. They're not going to say that.
Robert, you have a question? I hear you.
Yeah, sorry. I was wondering, this is kind of a scary question, but have you ever had somebody trying to sneak in who is religious under false pretenses?
That's a good question. Yes, and I'm not sure if it's yes or it's semi-yes. We went early on, Richard Wade might remember this one. Early on in our process, we were still trying to create our vetting process and our questions and how we brought people in. And there was one therapist that got into our system, and from her webpage and from the early questions we asked, she looked like she was appropriate. And then one day I get a call from somebody that said, I went to that therapist and here's my experience. And turns out she had a bunch of New Age bullshit. And if we just clicked back about 3 pages into her website, we just found that she was really into Reiki and acupuncture, and I mean, just all sorts of stuff was back there in the corners of her website. So it was her own darn fault. I don't think she was intentionally trying to, quote, sneak in or get by us. I think we just didn't ask enough questions or do our own research. So that taught us real early, of course, and then immediately we let her know, you're not right for us, and we kicked her out. She didn't like it. She was pretty pissed about it, actually. Wrote me a long letter about how terrible I was. But the fact is, it was our fault, and I admitted it. We should have vetted her a little bit more carefully. So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
We are pretty careful. Like I said, we turn down between 30 and 40% of all applicants. And that's a pretty high rate, because if you think about it, they went to our webpage, and if you go there yourself and you click on apply to be a therapist, you can do this. Anybody can do it. Just go to seculartherapy.org, hit the apply to be a therapist, and read the qualifications. So people come in there, they read what we require, and if they say, well, I don't fit that, they never apply in the first place. So we're screening out a huge number of people right off the bat. But even then, 30% still get rejected. Usually they're rejected because they've got pretty bad training, or they have a training, or they've got a model of psychotherapy that is not evidence-based. There's a lot of woo-woo out there. There's a lot of bullshit. There's a lot of therapy out there that has no basis in any research. There's no peer-reviewed articles. It's just some therapist decided this is a great way to cure somebody of something. And we just can't risk that. You can see here in this, can you see?
Yes, we can see.
Blue graph, okay. The graph on the left is the 9 years of people registering to be, to find a therapist. And you'll see that it's 23,250 people have used our service to find, and I'll go to the other side, 400 and I think we got 481 registered therapists now. And that's always changing because we've got therapists that retire, you know, or they stop taking clients because they're too full. And then of course we've got new applicants coming in. So that's the Secular Therapy Project. If you want to help somebody get mental health, good mental health services, they or you can help them. You can register as a client, go in and search, and you'll find, it'll show you that there's 4 therapists within 50 miles of your house, for example. In this day and age with the COVID, you have to be careful, therapists have to be careful about licensing requirements. Many therapists cannot provide therapy outside of their state. So they would, if you were in California and you wanted to retain a person in Texas, you probably couldn't do that because their license wouldn't allow it. So you might need to just search within your state. And we have search functions that allow you to do that. So that's a Secular Therapy Project. There's a lot more to it than I've shown you, but I'd be happy to entertain any questions. We're coming up on about 45 minutes that I've been talking, so I'm going to wind it down here a bit, Judy.
All right, yeah, let's see. Does anybody have, if you want to stop sharing, we can see if anyone has any questions. You can either put them in the chat or
I have a question.
all right, Nan, is that you?
Yes.
Sure, go ahead.
I'd like to ask Dr. Darrel if you would consider Jungian psychology new age woo-woo.
Jungian psychology doesn't have any peer-reviewed support. It's been around for 50, 60 years. It just doesn't have the scientific background and support that we require. So the quick answer to that question is, nope, they wouldn't be allowed into our system.
Good.
Interesting. Any other questions? I'm looking at any hands raised or.
Well, I see a question here about sex addiction, and I'm happy to talk about that. In fact, I can talk about that all day. I have a video that you might want to go to. It was done I did a talk at Free OK a few years back on the myth of sex addiction. Dr. Darrel Ray has an entire book on the myth of sex addiction. And Dr. Marty Klein has an article titled, he published in the American Humanist about 5 years ago, called "You Are Addicted to What?" ? The fact is, there's no such thing as sex addiction. People may have problems with sex. I'm not denying that. But there's been 3 different attempts over the last 30 years to identify what sex addiction is, and nobody's been able to identify it. Nobody has been able to define it. If you cannot define the symptomatology of a mental condition, then you have no right to name it or diagnose it.
Is it in the DSM?
It is not. It is not in the DSM. Now, it's not to say that people don't have concerns about their sexuality, but if you've followed Josh Grubbs lately, and of course the news media is full of sex addicts, mostly celebrities and religious people who are trying to get out of jail free card, that's what sex addiction is. It's a religious concept. It is not a secular concept. There's no scientific evidence for it. There's no peer-reviewed journals. There's no way to diagnose it. And believe me, people have tried. There was what I would consider a charlatan about 1983. Patrick Carnes, Dr. Patrick Carnes is his name, wrote a book about sex addiction, and it you know, it was a great terminology, and people seemed to love it. And everybody started saying they were a sex addict. Of course, who's diagnosing this? If you use he's actually got a little test you can take. So I took the test and I found out I'm a sex addict. And then I brought it to the Free OK talk. You will see it actually. If you watch my Free OK talk, I can put the link.
What's Free OK? I don't know what Free OK is.
Free Thought Oklahoma.
Okay.
It's a conference they did. There's probably 600 people in the room when I gave this talk. It's on video. You can go there. I can send you the link if you want.
Sure.
Well, what happened? It's a one-page test. You take the test to find out if you're a sex addict, right? I took the test. I'm a sex addict. I gave that test to everybody in the room, 600 people, and about 300 of them actually filled out the test or had time to fill it out. You know, sometimes people don't have time to fill it out. At the end of my talk, I asked, how many of you took the test? You know, about half the people raised their hand. I said, how many of you are sex addicts? And about 80% of the people kept their hand up. Okay, if 80% of the people are something, it's probably not a very good diagnosis. How can 80% of the people be a sex addict? It's because you read the questions in his test, they're very religiously based. I have on tape a Catholic spokesperson saying, if you have looked at porn one time, you are a sex addict. So I'm just guessing about 80% of the people in this room right now, and not including me, of course, are sex addicts. It's crazy how there's just nothing in that test that would help you identify what that means. There's a lot of shame and guilt. Josh Grubbs, a researcher, I'm forgetting where he's at now, Case Western University was where he did his doctorate. He's continued to do a lot of research on this whole notion of sex addiction. And what he found was the person who's most concerned about their sex addiction is a religious person. Sex addiction is a religious concept, as I said earlier. Who is identifying and who is diagnosing you? The person diagnosing you is your mother-in-law. It's your daughter, it's your spouse, it's your husband, it's the priest, it's the minister. It is not a PhD psychologist. It's not somebody whose job it is to diagnose. Because if they diagnose you as a sex addict, they're engaging in malpractice. They should have their license revoked. It's that simple. You can't diagnose something in somebody that hasn't got scientifically validated criteria for that diagnosis. So that's where I'm at. Robert,
right,
you've got
Robert,
a question.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for your talk and telling us about your wonderful organization. Yeah, I wanted to comment, Judy, thank you so much for the introduction you gave about the shooting in Atlanta. Everybody is trying to be very politically correct about the race issue, and obviously I have reasons to be very sensitive about Asian Americans, but the point that you made is very important. And you know, many industrialized countries make it perfectly legal to have consensual sex for money, and I think perhaps that would go a long way to making it less of an issue about guilt, because if it's legal, then it's very hard for these religious people to keep making it something really horrible.
Yeah, if you look at, for example, the news media came out and this guy who murdered all these people, he says he's a sex addict. He quote, confessed that to his roommate. Well, who decided he was a sex addict? And where did that notion come from? It came from his church. If you look at culture in America right now, when a politician gets in trouble, what do they say? I'm a sex addict. When a celebrity gets in trouble, what do they say? I'm a sex addict. It's actually a get out of jail free card. I can go to a sex addiction treatment clinic. And oh, by the way, those are not scientific. And once I get treated, then I can come out and I get forgiveness. I don't have to go to jail. It's like, you don't hear the sexual scandal. You didn't hear the Italian president who got caught with his pants down saying he's a sex addict. And you don't hear it in France. You generally don't hear it in England. The way where you hear it is right here in the United States with our puritanical laws about sex and sexuality. The sex addiction plea has now become a get out of jail free card. I mean, how many celebrities have you heard that when they got caught doing something quote unquote inappropriate sexually, they said, well, I've got a sex addict problem. And they go to treatment, they come out and they get a movie the next month after they get out, a movie contract.
That's a really good point. Any other questions? I don't see any other questions in the chat right now. Any hands raised? So thank you again. I think I'm going to move on to some announcements.
Right.
Really appreciate you coming in. You may want to stick around because RFR shows up again in one of our announcements.
All right. I'm going to get that link and put it up here too. While we're
Okay,
at it.
that would be great. Yeah, let me make a couple of announcements here.
Can I say something?
Oh, sure, Marion, please.
I was just thinking the reason that 80% of your audience ended up as sex addicts is probably because the questionnaire is written by people who want to provide counseling for them. So they make it so that you need them.
You are exactly right. Exactly right. And who's going to provide the sex addiction counseling? It's a Christian counselor. It's somebody who buys into that bullshit.
Yeah.
I just put the link up to my talk, but also look at Dr. David Lay's book or look at Dr. Marty Klein's essay that published in the American Humanist.
Great. All right. Thank you. Let me share a couple of announcements here from the sublime, maybe to the ridiculous, but I just want to remind people that our board member, I thank them all for participating in our board. They're all welcome to continue. Some people have been participating in the board for many years and may want a break. Please consider joining the board if you're a member. It's a great opportunity for growth and development. We'll find a way to use the talents that you have. And, a broad-based and cross-trained, capable leadership will help keep us strong and resilient. So please consider investing your time in our future. Also wanted to give you a reminder that our friend, Professor Joe Blankholm and his collaborators sent out the Secular Communities Survey, largest ever study of the community life of non-believers. You would have all, if you're on my mailing list, have received a link to this. Please fill that out. And let me remind you of a couple upcoming events. A week from tomorrow, Dave will do his next installment of the update on the COVID-19 pandemic. So attend that if you're able. And then in April, we have Dr. Mark Juergensmeyer, UCSB Distinguished Professor, talking about Proud Boys and white nationalists, about are they Christian terrorists? And then I wanted to mention this. This is where, Recovering from Religion shows up here as a sponsoring organization. Humanist Society of Santa Barbara is supporting this event called May Day for Humanity. It's going to happen on Thursday, May 6th. It's the same day as the National Day of Prayer. So it's also the National Day of Reason, some counter programming there. And led by the Free Thought Society and these other organizations, it's going to be a 3-hour event of comedians, poets, musical performers, and an online auction to raise funds for secular homeless shelters and food banks. And Nan Cisney, who's here in the meeting today, is collecting items that you may want to donate for the auction. They've got a good lineup of talent, including Penn and Teller, I see down there, the Voices of Reason Choir, who we've heard. And if you have items for donation, people will, at the auction, will bid on the items, and then these organizations will pay for shipping to get them to the person who offered them. So there's no cost to you. If you have items to donate, please let them know. And then finally, May 15th, we've got Hank Pellissier. talking about the Humanist Global Charity, who they are, what they do, current focus and projects. And finally, one more thing. Marion, would you like to talk about this book discussion? Let's see, where are you, Marion?
I was muted. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I read this book. This Is How It Always Is, and suggested it when Robert contacted me. And it's a story about a family of 5 boys, and the youngest son decides he should be a girl. And it's a story about how a family handles a child who is going to be or is transgender. And I thought it was very well done. And it's a, let me see, I should read some of the stuff you've got up here, Judy. It's an opportunity to raise your awareness of transgender life and issues. The book is available online at local libraries and bookstores. How does this relate to principles of humanism? We are concerned with securing justice and fairness in society and with eliminating discrimination and intolerance. We attempt to transcend divisive parochial loyalties based on race, religion, gender, nationality, creed, class, sexual orientation, or ethnicity, and to strive to work together for the common good of humanity. We believe in the fullest realization of the best and noblest that we are capable of as human beings. Those are great quotes, and I encourage people to read the book. And we're going to have our meeting on Saturday, June 5th, and come and discuss the book.
Come and join us. We'll put the link in our newsletter, but we wanted to give everyone a heads up so you have a good 2 months notice to get the book, read it, and then we'll discuss it on Saturday, June 5th, and Marion will lead the discussion. I guess, Marion, you know the author too, right? So
No, I don't know the author.
Oh, you don't know the author, I'm sorry.
I offered to contact the author, and I've written her an email, but I don't know if she'll answer.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, thank you for being willing to lead the discussion on this book and for bringing it to our attention.
Hey, Judy,
Yes,
could I just say one more thing?
sure.
Recovery from Religion is also co-sponsoring the upcoming in May conference on religious trauma, and I'll be one of the keynote speakers there. Religious trauma has become quite a thing to discuss lately. So anyway, just want to let everybody know that.
Yeah, put the, you have the link in the chat.
I did,
Perfect,
yeah.
perfect. Well, thank you everyone for attending. Darrel, as always, it's fascinating. I love listening to you. I appreciate all the work that you've done, all the people that your organization has helped. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for
Okay,
having me.
great. Yeah, now before you go, Robert, who asked a couple of questions, will be writing up the talk so that we can share with people who just read our newsletter. And so he'll be communicating with you, I think like he did last time, looking for your input and stuff.
He did such a damn good job. I couldn't believe that I actually said all that stuff. So thank you, Robert. You're better at capturing anything than I am on that stuff.
So he'll do that. Yeah, he does a great job for us. And then also with the recording, we just started recently our own YouTube channel. So we'll be getting this up on YouTube. And our speaker from last month, I should tell everyone who was not aware of this, we put his speech, this was, maybe you know him, Ridvan Itamir, the apostate prophet. We put his talk up on our YouTube channel, and we're over 3,500 views.
Wow.
I know, I almost fell over. And we went from having 2 subscribers to I don't know, close to 80. Because he has quite a big following. So we're looking to continue to expand the content because we have great speakers here at HSSB, really interesting talks, and to be able to get that out, I think is a great opportunity for us and for our members and interested parties.
Question.
Yeah.
And if someone wants to hear this program that we had today, but couldn't make it, can you send us the link where we can find it?
Yes. As soon as we edit it and upload it, then it's on our YouTube channel. And just like I did with the apostate prophet, I sent out a link to everybody saying, here's where you can find it.
Oh, so we'll
it's-
send it out.
I'll send it out, yes. And it may take a couple of days or weeks for me to get that all done. But yeah, we're working on it. We're looking for people with video editing skills. If anybody has video editing skills, simple edit, that would be a big help in us getting those things up faster.
Not me.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? No?
Just wanted, it comes to me about nymphomania.
Oh,
What does Dr. Darrell think about that? I think it's funny that there's a name like mania for women, but for a man, he's just a Don Juan.
oh yeah. What happened to all the nymphomaniacs?
Yeah, they kind of disappeared when you challenge the patriarchy. There's all sorts of things that start changing. I think it was a terrible way to view women's sexuality. And there are some women with high levels of sexual desire and drive, just like there's men with high levels of sexual desire and drive. Only trouble is with men, we labeled that as, I don't know, desirable or good, and with women we label as bad. That's what happened to them, Nan. At least in my estimation.
So it was never a legitimate diagnosis.
Oh, hell no. It's not legitimate. I mean, it's just, if you look at human sexuality and desire on a spectrum, it's a bell curve. And there's some people that have a really high sex drive, and there's some people that have a very low sex drive, and most people are in the middle. They just happen to call them the men with the high sex drive Don Juans and the women nymphomaniacs. It's just another example of sex negative attitudes and labeling. That's all it is, in my estimation.
Great. All right. Thanks again, everybody. Thanks for attending. We'll see you next month.